Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I do not take for granted 1 minute that you are listening to this episode, or you found the Close the Chapter podcast, or that you might be a reoccurring listener. I just want to say thank you. I am on a mission to help people find healing, to feel seen and known, and to be understood, and give you information that helps expand your heart, open your mind up, and invite new ways of thinking in. So then you can begin to jump out of the black and white thinking and into more of an expansive view of many things can be true at once. And I had such a delightful conversation this week that I want to pass it along to you. And I want to offer you the free journal that's available at Kristen, KRISTEN, Boyce, BOICE.com/free resources. And I'm so excited to share this conversation because it's different than some of the other conversations I've had. And this guest has such a tender heart. And it's very rare to find people in the medical community that have such compassion and tenderness. And it just warmed my heart. It really did. And he wanted new ideas. He wanted different ways of thinking. And I love that. That is such an expansive person that I hope to be. I hope I am that way too, that I can listen to many different perspectives and grow and evolve. And when this person proposed come on the podcast, I was like, yes, this sounds interesting. So let me tell you about him. Dr. Marschall, and he said, just call me Marshall at the very beginning, which I thought was very kind, is an executive vice president for medical affairs at the University of Michigan, dean of the medical school, and CEO of Michigan Medicine. He earned his doctorate in molecular biology at Vanderbilt University and his medical degree from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where he also completed a residency in internal medicine. He was a cardiology fellow at Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Runge is the author of over 250 publications and holds 5 patents for novel approaches to healthcare. As a Texas native who spent 15 years in North Carolina and an avid thriller reader, Runge has experienced so many you can't make this up events that inform his fictional and nonfictional writing alike. And he just wrote a new book called The Great Healthcare Disruption. And that's what we were focused on today. And he really wanted to brainstorm and wanted ideas on what else can we be doing to disrupt the healthcare system. And I really used a lot of client experiences along with my own to talk about mental health, in particular, emotional and mental health, and how that affects the physical body and disease and where we are with the medical community doing their own mental health work. It was a very interesting conversation. We talked about what could be different in the healthcare community, what's up and coming, like what does AI look like? What are some new technologies that are coming out? We focused on mental health much of the conversation, and he was just delightful to talk to. So I hope you get a lot out of this conversation. Share it with those that might be in the medical community or healthcare. And I'd love to start a conversation about this. He wants feedback. So he gives his personal information if you want to go to his website, which we link in the show notes. And let's start a conversation about healthcare. I know we already are, and I'm grateful for everyone that works in the healthcare community. Truly grateful because it takes people to help other people find healing, to heal our bodies, to heal our minds, to help us usher through and cure diseases and cancer and surgeries. And then there's also same with the mental health community. How could we get better? How could anybody get better? That's really what this conversation is. How can we all look at things and appreciate what we have and then see where we can grow? So here is my conversation with Marshall. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I know many of you have gone through the healthcare system and had frustrations. You've been feeling like a number that people don't care about you. It's hard to get coverage. It's really affected how you feel. when you're going into the healthcare system. And my guest today is ready to disrupt the healthcare system altogether. He has so many brilliant ideas, and I cannot wait to dive into them. So if you are maybe disgruntled, isn't the right word, but you feel a little discouraged, how it's affected you mentally or emotionally, this is the episode for you. So welcome, Marshall, to the podcast.
Thank you, Kristen. It's great to be on your podcast.
So, okay, your book, which is called The Great Healthcare Disruption, right?
Yes.
What was the inspiration for you writing this book?
Well, I was contacted by Forbes Books and asked if I was interested in writing a book about healthcare and sort of interested. And I said, well, what about healthcare? And they said, whatever you want. And I said, oh, okay. So it was about a year-long process working closely with Forbes. And the idea from the start was that healthcare is far from perfect. We have lots of great things about healthcare in the United States, but there are lots of things that are not so great. And they haven't been getting a lot better. And maybe, as in one of the chapters, a prescription for changing how we address healthcare might be useful. So I wanted to get into that conversation. And you and your listeners, I think it would be great to get feedback from them. I have a website and it solicits feedback. Do you have new ideas about healthcare to really kind of start a conversation?
Oh, I would love that. Tell the listeners where to go if they want to give you feedback.
All right. So I'm going to spell it out. It's drmarshallrunge.com. So it's drmarschallrunge.com. It's all one word.
Perfect. I think you're the perfect person to bring this to the table with your expertise and your background. And you're teaching people really about the medical system. And so it makes sense that Forbes is like, yes, Dr. Runge, Marshall, we would like you to write this book. And in the book, we're talking about many different ideas. When you were writing it, what was the one idea that you first came to that you felt like was one of the most important to disrupt the healthcare system?
Well, there's so many, but where I started, which I think is really important, is around access to healthcare, close partnership with your physician or with a medical home that really allows you the kind of access that if you have a problem any day of the week, you can get in touch with a person who can help you with that. With that, then leading toward more of an emphasis on health than on healthcare. Now, I talk a lot about advances in healthcare in the book, but I think an area that just, except for the people that really think about it, the emphasis on health is not as great as it could be, partly because we're all strung out doing all kinds of different things. And our healthcare providers often are very busy. Whenever people ask me about this, I say, well, do you ever have trouble getting an appointment with your primary care physician or getting a new primary care physician? And the answer is almost 100% of the time, yes, as it is with me. I love my internist, but it's hard to get in touch with him. And so we've got to come up with ways to think about doing that differently. I start out with a graph that has two components to it. The first shows the cost of healthcare in the United States. And if you compare the cost, and everyone knows this, compare the cost of healthcare in the United States to other similar countries, we're way at the top. On the other hand, what was new to me is if you look at the number of primary care doctors compared to those other countries, we're way at the bottom. So the number of primary care doctors per 1,000 is very low here, which says we need to have more primary care, but we also need to be thinking about how are other ways that we can help people with their health if it's not to have a primary care physician who's available instantly.
So this brings up the point of, okay, you can't get into your healthcare provider. What I work with clients and I hear from them is they don't care about me. They don't listen to me. They don't really care about me. I'm just a number. It's like the herding cattle in the waiting room, like
Yes.
they're herding cattle and I'm just one of the numbers and I'm in and I'm out. And I don't feel like they care. What do you say about that?
Well, I'm a physician myself, and I say that I understand that completely. And it's too bad, but I do. And I think this jumps to a different part of the book, use of technology, and use of technology, not just in the way you hear about it. And I have Bot as my healthcare provider, but more are there ways that technology can help physicians, nurses, all healthcare providers be more effective. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. One is a relatively new technology called ambient AI. And what ambient AI refers to, and there's several different products out on the market. Like you and I are having a conversation and you're helping me with my problems, but we're having a conversation. You're not having to look over and type notes or make notes or things that can cost any kind of healthcare provider an hour or two a day, largely lines up at the end of the day. And people are just feeling that's one of the things that has made people feel most burned out, people who are healthcare providers. So, this ambient AI, when I use it, I always ask somebody, is it okay if we use this? And they always say yes. And it completely changes the interaction to like it used to be. So we have a conversation. If you need to examine me, you examine me, but it's not rushed. And the reason it's not rushed is at the end of our encounter, as AI only can do, it doesn't give you a transcript. It gives a very high quality note, a medical note on your interaction. And I've seen this and I've looked at these. It takes me maybe a minute to read it and say, yeah, that's good, or I need to correct this or that. So rather than having 15 of those that are going to take me 15 minutes at the end of the day, unless I try to do it all while you're there, I'm done and I'm ready for the next person to see. So that's one kind of technology. Another is there are all kinds of different software to help me make sure I didn't miss something and I didn't think of a certain diagnosis or I didn't ask you about something that would be important in your treatment or your therapy. And so AI is now quickly moving into being able to provide that information in one place at one time. What I found is that I would look, there's several great ones out there. There's something called Up to Date, there's WebMD, there's Mayo Clinic website, web space, whatever they call it. But this is in one place and it's lightning fast, and you don't have to look for 5 different places. All you'd have to look at is saying, well, you're looking at a burned out doctor with gray hair who's seeming very stressed out and isn't exercising, isn't getting proper sleep. And then you look at that and it says, well, have you considered that he's got a substance abuse problem? Or have you considered that he's depressed? Have you considered that he's got anxiety syndromes? And so I don't think that we're anywhere close to AI replacing healthcare providers because what AI doesn't have, it just can't. I don't see how it ever will. It doesn't have human emotion. It can reply what it thinks it wants you want to know, but it really doesn't have empathy. So I'm sure when you're counseling people, you just don't tell them, oh, yes, I understand that completely. And all you need to do is X, Y, and Z. You have to come up with a plan. And AI just doesn't have that because it can't pick up those nuances. But as a helpful partner, it's awesome. So I think the more we incorporate this, the more we can both not be so far behind, not feel so stressed out, and make our encounters like they used to be really only 15 years ago or so. I think it's gotten much worse in the last 15 years.
I agree. I think it's gotten a lot worse. So you're saying that will free up space for the healthcare provider to be present, to be emotionally engaged, to really give you the time and care with your presence. And now you get 15 minutes and you got to be in and out because you got the
Right,
insurance companies to report to, right? I mean,
right.
you're at their mercy. I've got to get paid. I don't get paid if I don't have these patients in here. And so that model, you're saying AI could help free up how it used to be, which was spending time with the patient or the client.
Yes, it's not going to happen overnight, but I think it can definitely happen. The other important issue, which is always the elephant in the room, that what you mentioned is what insurance companies or any insurer will pay for. And what is absolutely true is preventive health will save on our healthcare bill for the United States. I mean, that's the solution. The solution isn't to have people run faster on the treadmill. It's to healthcare providers to provide to their patients how they can be healthier. And, lots of feedback. And if we do that, then don't end up having to run to the emergency room when you're way too sick. You can get things corrected midstream. I think healthcare for complicated medical problems in the United States is terrific. But if we can prevent people from having to go to that point of view, who wants to be in the hospital? Nobody. I think we also need to really put some emphasis on healthcare insurers realizing how important it is. It's a hard thing because commercial for-profit healthcare companies, healthcare insurance companies, they respond to their shareholders and they want to see their quarterly returns. If our conversation today, next month, next month for 2 years ends up that I'm sleeping again well, I'm exercising every day, I've been able to stiff arm some of the junk food I eat. If you're able to help me do that, I'm much less likely to have worsening chronic diseases that are going to end up making me have to go to the hospital or get more procedures or more tests. But they don't see that. They can't see that. Another part of my prescription is that if we only had in the United States, doesn't have to be fancy, but some baseline level of healthcare that people don't have to worry that they won't be able to pay their health bills. The only insurer that really looks at the long run is the government. I mean, you think about who would build a highway except for the benefit over the next 15 or 20 years. Nobody invests that kind of money except for the government. Or who would worry about quality of food or worry about all the things the government kind of has to worry about. So I'm not saying replace all commercial healthcare. In fact, something that I found I had no idea about, but I found was really interesting is we hear a lot about healthcare in countries like Denmark or Scandinavia or Switzerland or you pick it, and they tout how great their government sponsored healthcare is. But it turns out that in all those countries, 40, 50, 60% of people also have supplemental health care for the things that they're not getting out of the government healthcare plan. That's true in the UK and in Canada as well. So it's not pretending that the country would never be able to afford a blue plate special healthcare plan, but they could provide the basics, I believe, and help us become healthier. So now as I'm 70 years old, I'm thinking, how can I be healthier? About 50 years too late, but
I understand totally. Okay, question for you. One of the ways I think we can disrupt healthcare, you tell me if you've thought about this or what your thoughts are, is understanding trauma and what trauma does to the nervous system and to the body. We didn't used to know that trauma affects the body as much as it does. And we hold memory and we hold on to emotions. And if we don't process them and we don't move them up and out of the body, we can have chronic illnesses. What are your thoughts on that?
well, one question first. So I presume you're talking about both physical and emotional trauma
Yes, yes,
because
yes,
physical trauma can lead to emotional trauma.
yes, both. Any kind of physical or emotional trauma or mental, if you've had any
Yes.
mental trauma, how that impacts your health.
Ah, I think that is I'll call it a pinnacle like important point. I think that so much of our health in general depends on our emotional health and our mental health. And I'm not an expert in this area, but I think helping people deal with those traumas. And I know in my own life, some of them you never forget, and then they build on. And when I talk to people, it's very common that they're losing so much of their emotional bandwidth because of these things that I think having really qualified people who can help them deal with these is an absolutely essential part of overall healthcare. I'll say, I didn't say it before, I'll say that I think this is another area of healthcare that is really woefully underserved. There can be stigma. I think there's much less stigma than there used to be. I was talking to a young person recently who has OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and was taking 3 or 4 medications for it, and it wasn't helping. And Adderall type medications were preventing sleep. The other ones were making him sleep during the day, and it was just awful. And finally went to I didn't know there was such a thing, a therapist who that's their specialty. And it's, what did he call it? It's like,
EMDR?
yeah, yes,
Uh-huh. I'm
exactly.
trained in that.
That's exactly what it was. And so, kind of working through it and really exercises to do things. Some of the stuff he told me, and his therapist said, "Hey, you're pretty good at this. Most people have to really badger and beg them to do these exercises." But this young guy did them. And now I don't remember how often he was seeing his therapist, maybe more than once a month, maybe weekly for a while. And now, after a period of time, he sees him every 2 months. He sees his therapist. And it has changed his life. I mean, this is somebody I know very well. And I just,
It's
he's different.
remarkable. It's
It is
remarkable.
remarkable.
It really is because you think,
But
"Can
but
that
it's
do
impressed
that?"
his health too. I mean,
Yes.
he's sleeping again, he's exercising again. I think those are such critical pillars of health.
And
But it started with this therapist like you.
that's wonderful. I love that. I would love to see more physicians trained in questions to ask and how to ask people coming in for intakes. Have they had in utero trauma? Did parent drink, take prescription meds, use meth, alcohol, drugs, any smoke pot while they were pregnant with you? I mean, there's so many. How was the birthing process? Like, have you had any surgeries when you were little, like tubes or any? All of that is held in the body. And I would feel like the patients would be seen more and we could quickly make some correlations on possibly some theories or hypothesis on some health issues. And I think that could very much disrupt the healthcare industry if we could identify it quickly, even in pediatricians, because we know in adopted kids, we're going to see a lot more of in utero trauma. And we used to call it FASD, and now we still do, but it's more than just alcohol and the facial features.
Right.
So I wish we had more of that. I don't know if that's part of your theory or part of your disruption of the medical system or not.
Well, I have to say, it's something I'm gonna thinking about now. Like I said, I learn a lot in these podcasts, and this is something I had just never, ever thought about. I have a daughter who's a pediatrician, and so particularly really starting with adolescents, they know and they have been taught that you can't have this kind of conversation with the parent in the room, and the parents don't like that a bit. But she and her group, they insist that I don't know exactly the age, but they're able to have private conversations. And what I found, and I don't see kids, but what I found is that people, when you're with a person one on one, they're much more likely to say things that they just don't want to say in another setting. And some of the questions you ask, I just wouldn't have thought of asking those. So, one thought that I have just in our conversation today is I don't know how much you and your colleagues interface with pediatric training, but I think that's an area where I know that the physicians and the nurse practitioners and PAs would be interested in this group of questions you're talking about asking. Fetal alcohol is, I mean, that's massive trauma because it's more than it results in all kinds of
Mhm.
long-term medical
Mhm.
problems that can't be fixed. But all these other occasions, you're just saying this makes me think of several people that I've known who have had traumas like that that I really think have impacted them. Uh,
Yes, we didn't know that back then, and then people think, well, they look normal, these kids that may have adoption and maybe they use not alcohol, but they use something else, another substance,
right,
and they don't have the facial features, but they look normal, but they're not functioning like normal in society. They don't have any place to go. Once they turn 18, the parents are ended up staying with the parents and the parents are worn out. There's no medical care and diagnoses to get support and resources. And that's a huge issue that we're not talking about, in my opinion. Like, there's no place for these kids to go because there's permanent, and I hate saying that, and you're the doctor, but there's permanent brain damage from the usage in utero. The developing brain was impacted and the
right,
nervous system was impacted, even though they look completely normal and they got
right,
missed in the medical system because the old school was to look at the facial features and they didn't know until the school mental health professionals started to get involved. And then now there's some doctors coming online really learning more about it, which I think is going to be helpful. But I think it's a big issue. I mean, in the medical healthcare field.
I do too, and I think it's so interesting. Again, part of the benefit of talking to people who do health different parts of healthcare, one of my kind of core beliefs is that if a person gets their healthcare somewhere where there's really a great medical home, that they then have these opportunities they wouldn't have necessarily otherwise. Again, going back to the federal government, there's a series of clinics that are called federally qualified health centers, and they're supported by the government, but they provide a wonderful medical home. And so I used to work in one when I was in North Carolina, half a day every other week, not a lot. I'm a cardiologist, but they have PAs, they have nurse practitioners, they have doctors, they have therapists, they have social workers, they have pharmacists. And it's a wraparound service so that they readily recognize what you're talking about.
Yes. I think one of the elements that we're seeing now in mental health combined with healthcare is I want to go back to something you were talking about earlier is AI. We see AI offering a lot of information. And now we're seeing that some people are using it for therapy because they're like, oh, they get me, they understand me.
Right. Oh,
And so we're taking the human element out. And then there's been some chatter amongst the field that it can be dangerous. Like they're telling them things that are not true or dangerous. It's an
right.
interesting conversation to see. I think AI can be extremely helpful. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on some of the downsides to AI.
Well, I find that, again, I'm very much in sync with what you're saying. There were some cases that came to light in the fall that I got asked about, and they're an illustration of what you were just saying. So, one was really tragic. It was a teenager in Florida who had become more and more socially isolated and felt that his only friend was AI bot that was an attractive bot that was based on a character from the Game of Thrones, and it went back and forth, back and forth. And ultimately, and these transcripts were and are available, it was clear that teenager was depressed and was heading into an area where he thought that the signals he was getting from this AI bot were that if he committed suicide, they could be together forever. And talk about a horrible tragedy, and he did. But I think there are many, many less dramatic but very troublesome ways that people will interact with AI. And I'll say two things about it. One, I'll just repeat what I said before. I don't think there is anyone who can, except for somebody trying to sell their product, can really claim that AI has emotional intelligence. I just don't think it's just not there. That's such a complicated thing. You see one person 1 hour, you see another person the next hour, they're totally different. How does AI adjust that? I don't think it can. So that's part of it. The other part, which I mentioned in passing, is social isolation,
Isolation,
being
yes.
socially isolated.
Yes.
Isolated. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think that also has become a problem. And I don't know if you would know better than I do, whether that's something that is much worse today than it was pre COVID-19 pandemic.
It is
But
worse.
when you look at there's a whole group of people who are touting, how do you live longer? How do you live longer, healthy life expectancy? And they talk about several basic concepts, but one is family and friends and colleagues. It's not being socially isolated. Another is reliable, reproducible sleep habits. Another is getting some sort of exercise. It doesn't have to be running a marathon, just 25 or 30 minutes a day. And another is healthy eating. So, these seem like such simple concepts that I think it's on us as healthcare providers to help promote that. But I think in particular, to also help people understand that AI is not going to solve their difficult emotional problems.
Yes. I'm just throwing all these ideas out at you. You're like, oh my goodness. What do you think about providing therapy for medical providers? Because the burnout's so high. You guys have trauma of your own that you hear, you witness, you see. I mean, these are life or death experiences.
Right.
What if we offered that as part of disrupting the healthcare system? I'm throwing these ideas out there because we work with a lot of healthcare providers and it helps them so much be able to free them up of the burdens they carry or you
I
carry.
think that's a terrific idea. I think it's not generally done. And I think, particularly, I can speak to physicians. I think for physicians, certainly in my era, and I think even maybe not the most recently graduated, we're of the sort that we would see a weakness in ourselves in having to get therapy. And I think that's a big problem. And we need to be, and more in medical schools and in training programs, it's being emphasized. It is not a weakness and you need to seek help. But sometimes those resources are hard to get also. There are not enough providers to talk to. And I know that for many of our faculty and trainees, they don't want to be seen in our system with what they perceive might be seen as a weakness to them, even though we all know that we're all bound to keep everything inviolably to ourselves. People worry about that. So then they're looking outside the system. So, Kristen, I think it's a great idea. I'd love to see more of that because as I think back about my career, this is true for all doctors, I presume, I'm sure of it. They may not admit it, but we have some decisions that we made about patients that we wish we could have unmade or things that we didn't pay enough attention to. And those can be haunting for a long time. I mean, just talking to you today, I remember one where I was a resident and I should have checked labs before I went home and I didn't check them before I went home. And a person died that night and I just took me forever to get over that.
It's so hard. It really is. Cause then you're like, oh,
Yeah.
I wish I would have done that. And I feel like you guys make big decisions and doing the best you can with the information you have. We've made a movement with first responders because we're like, okay, we're going to get first responders are going to get EMDR because that's the new treatment that the US government and the military have endorsed. It's been around over 40 years now. That's what we were.
So explain that for just a moment.
So it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And for those listeners that don't know, it's called EMDR. And
I'm one of those listeners.
yes,
So
it was founded by Dr. Francine Shapiro. And she discovered when she was working with Vietnam veterans, that their eyes were moving back and forth when she was talking to them. They
hmm.
were accessing different parts of their memory. So their
Oh,
senses,
interesting.
what they smelled, what they saw, what they heard, their body sensations and their emotions and their cognitions, like what they believed about themselves. Like, I failed my whoever it was. And she realized that in REM sleep, we're also moving our eyes back and forth. We're going from the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere. And she started playing with this eye.
I've never heard all this. This is
Yeah,
interesting.
so it's very interesting. She started playing with this eye movement back and forth to the right and left hemispheres. And these were vets that were in therapy for 25 years, didn't make any progress, suffered from addiction. And she just started playing with this eye movement and realized they are releasing what they've held in their nervous system. the sights, the sounds, the smells, what they heard, what the beliefs they've had about themselves, the emotions by this eye movement, by this right and left hemisphere, what we call it bilateral stimulation. And you don't have to share what happened. You don't have to say a word. You don't have to tell us every detail. And it frees the person up coming into therapy to go, okay, I don't have to tell you everything. Nope. We're just going to reprocess these pieces and not make you relive it. We're actually moving it up and out of the body. So your body can be free now, and you're not going to have these ailments or these nightmares or these flashbacks. And so it's been around 40 plus years, and now the government
Really?
has discovered it's research based.
Yeah.
And
Never heard of it.
I'm like, why aren't we offering this to other, like first responders are now taking heed. Like we have fire departments, police departments that are all kind of jumping on board, but we're not having the medical community. I'm like, you guys are just as traumatized as first responders. You guys are making decisions, you're operating tests, you're hearing stories, and these stick with us because we're humans and we care. So to me, I'm like, why aren't we getting the medical community the same? Why aren't we making movement there? And it makes sense that what you're saying is there's stigma. And just like dentists, there's stigma, attorneys, there's stigma. I mean, there's
Right.
certain professions that haven't made as much movement. It'd be interesting to me to disrupt the healthcare industry with mental health resources and
Yeah.
destigmatize it.
I would greatly appreciate it if you would send me a couple of references on this.
I will. I
It's
will.
something I want to read about. I also want to just comment. You and I both keep talking about disrupting the health system, and people often think of disruption as a bad thing. We're talking about it in a very positive way, that it needs to be changed. But disruption grabs people's attention. Forbes came up with that title, "The Great Healthcare Disruption," but I liked it.
I like it. What other things haven't we covered that you feel like are important on how we can disrupt the healthcare system? Your ideas for disrupting it.
Well, I'll mention a couple of others. So we've talked about primary care and preventive health. We talked about AI. Another area where I think there's lots of promise is in developing some advanced therapies. These are more niche, but you probably see this, and I don't see it so much because I don't see children, but there are inherited genetic illnesses that are just crippling. And, the worst of them, the child only lives starts out doing pretty well for a year or two and then goes downhill and may only live 3 or 4 years. Others are more drawn out. In the last few years, there have been therapies developed using what's called RNA therapy, very specific gene therapies that correct an inherited deficit. And they are truly amazing. Now, this may be something that only affects 2,000 children a year in the United States, but 2,000 children is 2,000 children. And for them, and now what you're saying about trauma for the parents, it could be transformational. For the children, when done early, they're completely normal going on. Now, we don't have 20-year experience to see what they look like at 20-year-olds, but the genetic abnormality can be corrected. The downside is because this is in such a small area, it's very, very expensive. Because the numbers are small, most insurance companies will pay for it. But I think we need to figure out how to get that expense down. And I think that'll happen as more of these therapies become available. But I think some people look at that and they say, oh my gosh, $1 million treatment, a one-time treatment for $1 million for one child. Well, that's true in some cases, but that the cost of care for that child for the rest of their life could easily exceed that by multiples. So I think we need to encourage this continued growth in technological biomedical advances because just think about today the drugs we have that we didn't have 20 years ago. Well, one that I talk about in particular is these weight loss drugs, the GLP-1 agonists, and they turn out to affect a part of the brain. Everybody thought that they were going to work for diabetes. That's how they were developed. And then the thought was, well, maybe they'll help with weight loss because they slow transit, GI transit, which they do. But really their effect is on part of the frontal lobe that has to do with these surges of dopamine we get when we do something pleasurable, whether it's eat high sugar, high fat food or drink alcohol or use drugs or many different things that sort of stimulate this dopamine release that then makes them highly addictive. So not saying that these particular drugs are a cure-all, but they're drugs that if we can figure out how to help all of us avoid some of these behaviors that are sort of the human condition that have been refined by generation upon generation of humans living a little longer, then I think that also could help. So it's a whole range of things from what people might say, well, that's not technological at all, which is preventive health to highly technological. I think these are important areas.
Those are. Have you heard of the blood test now that can test for 50 different cancers? It just
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on that?
I think that those absolutely have a role. Now, what I think is going to be even more transformational than that is what's called whole genome sequencing. So, when the Human Genome Project was done, completed around 2000, the first sequencing of a human genome cost $3 billion. And that was just for the sequences that code for proteins. It wasn't for all these other sequences that we still don't completely understand. Technology advanced. Now there's whole genome sequencing that can be done for about $250. So that is, I think you combine that information with some of these serological cancer tests because we don't really understand what all different genes are
Mm.
causing. And with the early iterations of 23andMe or what's the other popular one?
Ancestry.com or
Ancestry.com,
yeah.
they would look at a few genes might mean something in my background, might not mean anything in your background. So we have a long way to go. I think ultimately we'll be able to put those together. But now, right now, I think they both offer promise. For example, there are cancer genes that are absolutely going to make risk very high. So the BRCA cancer genes, it's not just women, it's also men, but breast cancer, but also are predictive in uterine cancer and cervical cancer. But there's a whole set of those. I mentioned those only because they're widely known that they are very high prevalence cancer. It's not 100%, but if you have a 70% chance of developing cancer, you're really going to pay attention to that. We just need to learn more about it. But a combination of the two, I think, is where we're headed. And with AI progressing as quickly as it does, in maybe 5 or 10 years, and we'll really be able to be predictive in looking at genomes.
Yes, which would be great. I think the last one I read that you had put in the book is home health care.
Yes.
And to me, it was like, okay, tell me more about your home health care stance.
So it's all part of, I wish I could say I came up with this. I didn't come up with it. But the idea that you get the right care at the right time, meaning early and in the right place. So with home health care now, so much can be done, whether you're in a medical office, rather than having to go to the emergency room and get whatever it is you need done. That can be done at home. And also discharged from the hospital, things can be done at home that can shorten your hospital stay by days. I mentioned in the book my personal experience with it, which is I had to have a hip replacement and I had an unusual complication that could be serious. It wasn't real serious in my case, but the traditional care would have been for me to remain in the hospital. Usually hip surgery, you go home the same day, which actually I had gone home the same day. And then I had this problem, came back, and it was making me crazy. I couldn't get any sleep. And I was actually, maybe because people knew me or whatever, I was in the ICU. I just didn't need to be in the ICU. So I started badgering them about, hey, don't we have great home health care? And they said, well, we do, but don't do that. I said, no, I really want to try that. And so they did let me go home. I had a nurse who was available, well, not the same person, but available 24/7. I had some monitoring equipment that I checked in with several times a day. I got blood work one time. I had physical therapy that came out starting on the very next day. And I'm not only convinced that uh, I wasn't thinking about the mental trauma of being in the hospital, but
Mhm.
it reduced that. But I was able to sleep and eat, and I think I got better so much faster than I would have in the hospital. And with so much less expense, a day in the ICUs, that's $2,000. This is like $200 at most. So, yes, I think if we can utilize healthcare at home with all we have in terms of monitoring equipment and wearables and those sorts of things, I think that can also be a disruption that would be wonderful. And there are now some companies that are providing home health care. I think there's a great future in that. Thank you for asking.
Yes, yes, I agree. My last question is, you've probably read many books in your life that have spoken to you. What is the maybe a couple of books that have really made an impact? Don't be constrained by the question. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be about this topic.
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. I love reading fiction, and a couple of authors that everything they write, I can't put down. So one is John Grisham,
Mhm.
and the other is writes a completely different kind of book. His name is Frederick Forsyth, and his are very detailed, and they really go into geography and politics, but they're a fiction. So I think those are great. There have been a few books in healthcare, and actually one that came out recently from an author named Eric Topol. I've gotten interested in aging, not because I'm so worried about my own aging, because I just find it an interesting topic.
Yes.
So he wrote a book called Superagers, and it just came out this summer. And it's really a very, very thoughtful, scientific based approach to aging. Again, it comes up with a lot of the same things: exercise, sleep, health, mental health, community, but it's done very thoughtfully. I'll mention one of the things, it's not a book. Sanjay Gupta, who actually turns out to be a graduate of the University of Michigan, he does these documentaries. And I saw one recently that was about xenografts. So, xenografts, the idea is taking animal organs in genetically modified animals and implanting them in humans. So, a big area is kidney disease. And so many people develop end stage kidney disease. They require dialysis 3 times a week. I mean, it really is a difficult situation. And so he gave a really great documentary it's about an hour long, available on CNN. You just look at CNN. And it's about this concept of using pig kidneys with some genetic modifications for human kidney transplants, because there are not enough kidneys to transplant. And so it's early days, but if things like that can happen that replace some of the most onerous and expensive medical therapies like dialysis, they can change lives. So that's more than you ask for.
I
But
love that. That's great. Thank you so much. Did you have him as a student?
oh no, yeah, I wish. No, I was here after he was here, but he's an alum and he comes back and we see him, and he gave a terrific commencement speech a couple of years ago. I'll mention one other author who's written a little book. His name is Brad Meltzer. He writes thrillers as well. He's a Michigan alum, and he gave the graduation commencement not this year but last year. And he wrote a little book that's you can read in 15 or 20 minutes, and it's called Make Magic, and it's inspiring. And he talks about how, as graduates, there are things that you can do that will really change lives. And a lot of it's about communication and caring and empathy. It's just inspirational. So if somebody wants a really quick 20-minute read that they'll then take that book and give it to all their friends and family, that's one that I would pick every time.
Fantastic. If I make it up to University of Michigan, I will have to come say hello.
That would be great. Love to see you.
Yeah, that would be great.
And don't forget to send me my references too.
Yes, I will. I will send those to you. And you exude empathy. You exude compassion and wisdom. And I just think you're making a difference in the world. And we're grateful to have you here. You're making an impact. And I know we all question, did I make a difference? Did I make impact? And the answer is yes, you have and you do. So thank you for being here. It's grateful to have met you. And thank you for your time here.
Well, thank you so much, Kristen. And it's a pleasure. And thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Makes a big difference.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week, and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, KRISTEN, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks and have a great day.